The moment the cameras switched on, the auditorium was already buzzing with anticipation. Everyone expected sharp words, but no one imagined that Melania Trump herself would ignite the spark with such a ruthless jab. Within the first 10 seconds, she leaned into the microphone, looked directly at Jasmine Crockett, and delivered the line that would explode across the nation. "You don't belong here. You're nothing but noise in a room full of leaders." Gasps echoed through the hall, and you could almost feel the tension harden into stone. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public attempt to strip Crockett of her credibility, her place, and her dignity. And that was precisely the trap Melania thought she had set. But she had no idea what storm she had just unleashed. Crockett's eyes narrowed, her hands gripping the edges of the podium, and you could see it written on her face. Silence was not an option. In that instant, the narrative flipped. What was meant to humiliate her had instead given her a stage to fight back harder than anyone expected. The audience leaned forward, reporters raised their cameras higher, and social media feeds lit up in real time. Viewers at home had no chance to scroll away. This was conflict in its rawest form. The insult was sharp, yes, but Crockett's response would prove sharper, cutting deeper than Melania could ever prepare for. And while the former First Lady thought she could dismiss Jasmine with a single sentence, she had unknowingly set in motion the kind of televised clash that becomes legend. This wasn't going to be a polite debate. This was a collision of two very different worlds, one built on polished appearances and whispered influence, and the other forged in relentless determination and unapologetic truth-telling. And the opening shot had already been fired. The air inside the chamber felt like it had been vacuum-sealed, every breath held in suspense as Jasmine Crockett finally raised her voice. She didn't shout. No, her tone was sharper than that. It was calm, deliberate, and laced with a venom that carried further than any scream ever could. "Noise?" she repeated, locking eyes with Melania. "The only noise I hear is the hollow echo of someone who's been propped up by power but never earned the respect of the people who actually fight for this country." The words cut through the silence like a razor, and suddenly the crowd erupted. Some in shocked laughter, others in murmurs of disbelief. The clash wasn't just verbal, it was visceral. The kind of moment where one insult spawns a chain reaction impossible to contain. Melania's face froze in a practiced mask, the kind of expression honed over years in the public eye, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. For a woman who had lived in the shadow of a man larger than life, being called out so directly was not part of the script. She tried to interject, waving a hand as if to dismiss Crockett's words as beneath her, but the audience wasn't buying it. The balance of the room had shifted. Jasmine was no longer defending herself. She was seizing the narrative. Cameras zoomed in, flashing red lights marking the broadcast across the nation. On millions of screens, Americans saw not just a congresswoman standing up to a former First Lady, but a reversal of the roles society often expects. Crockett wasn't waiting her turn. She wasn't softening her language. She was confronting privilege, entitlement, and the illusion of untouchability head-on. And in doing so, she tapped into something deeper. The frustration of citizens who felt dismissed, unheard, and unseen. The first strike belonged to Melania, but now Jasmine had the floor, and she wasn't about to waste a single second of it. Melania adjusted her microphone, her voice dripping with practiced calm as she attempted to regain the upper hand. "Respect?" she said, narrowing her eyes. "I earned respect by standing with my husband through the toughest years this country has seen. While others screamed from the sidelines, I stood in the White House. That is not privilege. It is sacrifice. Her words, heavy with self-righteousness, drew a brief applause from a small portion of the room. But for the majority, it rang hollow, a recycled defense too often used by those who cling to titles rather than substance. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her voice slicing through the chamber with precision. "Sacrifice?" she countered. "Sacrifice is a mother working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Sacrifice is a veteran who comes home broken and ignored by the very leaders who promised to fight for them. You standing beside a man who turned democracy into his personal business deal is not sacrifice. It's silence. And silence in the face of corruption is complicity." The words detonated like thunder. Gasps filled the room, and even those who had cheered Melania moments earlier shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The tension thickened, and cameras zoomed closer. Viewers across America could see the faint twitch at the corner of Melania's lips, the subtle sign of a woman unaccustomed to being challenged so directly. She tried to speak, but Jasmine pushed forward, refusing to yield the floor. "Let's be clear," Crockett declared, her tone rising with righteous fire. "No title, no position, and no last name makes you immune to accountability. You don't get to lecture the American people about sacrifice when you've never lived it. You've lived protected, insulated, and shielded from the very consequences ordinary people endure every single day." The crowd erupted. Cheers, whistles, and clapping thundered through the chamber. What had begun as a clash of words was now a symbolic battle, the entrenched privilege of the past facing the raw, unfiltered defiance of a new generation, and Jasmine Crockett was clearly winning. Melania Trump drew in a sharp breath, her composure cracking under the weight of Crockett's relentless fire. She raised her chin and declared, "I will not be lectured about sacrifice or loyalty by someone who has never stood in the halls of power. You talk about struggle, but you forget. This country was kept strong by people like my husband, people who dared to challenge the system and defend America from its enemies. We gave our lives to this nation, even when it meant facing the hatred of people like you who thrive on division." Her voice trembled only slightly, but enough for the cameras to catch it. The words were meant to ignite patriotism, yet instead, they fell flat. The room grew restless, whispers spreading like wildfire. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her eyes blazing, and pounced without hesitation. "Your husband didn't defend America. He sold it piece by piece to the highest bidder. He cozied up to dictators, undermined our allies, and turned the White House into a revolving door of corruption. And you, standing silently beside him, became a symbol of complicity. Don't you dare lecture me about loyalty to America. Loyalty isn't standing by a man who exploits this country. Loyalty is standing by the people who live in it." The crowd erupted with a roar of approval, but Jasmine didn't stop. She pressed harder, her words striking like hammer blows. "You think draping yourself in a flag makes you a patriot? Patriotism isn't a photo shoot on the White House lawn. Patriotism is fighting for justice, for freedom, for the rights of people who don't have a platform, who don't have cameras defending them. And let me remind you, when democracy was under attack, you didn't speak up. You stayed silent because your loyalty wasn't to America. It was to one man and one man only." Gasps rippled through the audience, the tension now unbearable. The battle wasn't just between 2 women. It had become a proxy war between 2 visions of America, one rooted in privilege and protection, the other in raw defiance and truth. Jasmine had seized the narrative, and Melania could only stand there, visibly shaken. Melania Trump's carefully rehearsed mask of elegance began to crack. Her lips trembled as she snapped back. "You are nothing but a loudmouth with no respect. Do you think screaming makes you right? Do you think humiliating a first lady proves you care about America? No. You're here to build your career on insults, not truth. The words spilled out too fast, too sharp, and the audience could sense her unraveling. She clutched the podium like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Jasmine Crockett, sensing blood in the water, leaned in with a voice as sharp as a blade. No, Melania. What I'm doing is exactly what America needs, tearing off the mask of hypocrisy. You stood beside a man who ripped families apart, who caged children, who divided this country for his own ego. And you? You smiled for the cameras and acted like it was normal. That isn't grace, it's cowardice. The crowd exploded with cheers, some rising to their feet. Cameras zoomed in on Melania's face, capturing the flash of panic in her eyes. Crockett pressed further, refusing to let her opponent breathe. You call me disrespectful? Let me tell you what's disrespectful. Using the White House like it's your husband's personal business office. Staying silent while he sold out our democracy. Pretending that standing in expensive gowns makes you a patriot. Real patriots don't hide behind designer dresses. Real patriots fight. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Reporters furiously typed, commentators whispered into hot mics, and even some of Melania's supposed supporters looked away uncomfortably. The perfect image of the untouchable First Lady was collapsing in real time. Jasmine drove the nail deeper. This isn't about me screaming, Melania. This is about you not having the courage to speak. While America bled, you stayed silent. While democracy cracked, you posed for photos. And tonight, America sees you for what you are. A shadow, not a leader. Melania opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The silence spoke louder than words, and Jasmine had the room in the palm of her hand. Melania Trump finally snapped. The tension in her voice was gone, replaced with raw frustration. You dare to lecture me about patriotism? She shouted, her accent thickening with emotion. I lived through humiliation, through constant attacks on my family, on my son, on my life. I know sacrifice better than you ever will. You are nothing but a performer, screaming for attention. You don't understand the weight of being in the White House, the constant judgment, the endless lies spread about us. And yet, you sit here pretending you are some savior of America. The room went silent, but not in the way Melania had hoped. Her words didn't land as strength. They landed as excuses. The cameras caught every flicker of anger, every note of bitterness. It was as if she had stepped out of her carefully guarded shell only to reveal weakness instead of resilience. Jasmine Crockett wasted no time. She pounced, eyes narrowing. Sacrifice? She echoed. Melania, don't twist the word. Sacrifice is a mother working 3 jobs to feed her kids. Sacrifice is a soldier fighting overseas for democracy. Sacrifice is an immigrant risking everything for a better life. What you describe is not sacrifice. It's privilege. And your privilege blinded you while the country suffered. Gasps filled the room, and a wave of applause broke out from the audience. Crockett didn't stop there. You say you endured humiliation? Maybe. But humiliation comes with accountability. And what the American people saw wasn't a victim. They saw a woman standing silently while her husband dismantled the values this country was built on. They saw you smile while families cried. If that is sacrifice, then America deserves better. Melania raised a trembling finger, trying to interject, but Crockett's voice thundered over her. You wanted to speak of judgment? Here's the truth. The judgment is not mine. It's America's. And tonight, America sees you not as a first lady of dignity, but as a silent partner in corruption. The crowd erupted. Melania's attempt to claw back her image had only handed Jasmine the sharpest weapon of all: her own words. The debate hall was electric, buzzing with the raw energy of what had just unfolded. Melania Trump sat back in her chair, visibly shaken, her usual composure cracked beyond repair. The cameras caught it all, her lips pursed, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to hold on to any remaining dignity. But the damage had already been done. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, stood tall. She let the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of her words to settle over the audience. Then she leaned into the microphone, her voice steady, sharp, and final. America deserves truth, not shadows. We deserve leaders who fight for the people, not for their own comfort. And tonight we've all seen the difference between silence and courage. The audience roared, clapping and cheering with a force that shook the stage. Some even rose to their feet, a standing ovation erupting as Crockett's words echoed across the room. Melania's eyes darted around, searching for allies, for a lifeline, but none came. Even her defenders in the crowd looked uneasy, reluctant to step into the line of fire after such a decisive blow. Crockett drove the final nail. You thought silence was power, but silence is surrender. And America will not surrender to corruption, not tonight, not ever. That line detonated like a bomb. The crowd exploded with applause, chants of "Crockett! Crockett!" filling the air. Social media lit up instantly, hashtags trending within minutes. Crockett vs. Melania, cast truth over privilege, America deserves better. Clips of Melania's faltering defense and Jasmine's fiery takedown spread like wildfire across every platform. In that moment, the debate wasn't just won, it was immortalized. Melania Trump had come to fight for her image, but she walked away diminished, her carefully built facade shattered under the spotlight. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, left the stage not just as a congresswoman, but as a symbol of defiance, her name now etched into the political memory of millions. The verdict was clear. Crockett had conquered the stage, and Melania's silence would echo far louder than any words she had spoken.